Okay, People's Republic of China. This one is quite interesting. This is official Chinese government data. You need to take it with a grain of salt because I think there would be many factors affecting how they present data. I personally find their data quite suspect, given what I've seen. But the interesting for China is that you look at the historical, this is the great leap forward. This is when they had a famine and they had a massive rise in deaths and a huge drop in birth. From 1963, they claim a spike in births. Again, I don't find this very believable because I don't see how you can go from having 21 to 23 million births to suddenly having 29 million births, particularly when you've just come out of a famine, when people's health has been devastated and a lot of people died. So for China, they introduced their one-child policy in 1980, some say 1979, and somehow it looks like their births went up, which again, I don't find believable because when I've looked at Taiwan's data in the same period, their births were going down and Taiwan didn't have a one-child policy. But the key thing to note is that 2020, 21, we don't see a rise in deaths, but 2023 in China, there's a spike in deaths. And many people believe this is grossly understated, that the government doesn't want to admit what happened. But China has had negative population growth. They're losing around 1 million people a year now since 2021. So this has got economic consequences. And if we look at Taiwan has got a super aging population already, and I would think that China has the same situation, meaning that their births will continue to plummet and their deaths will rise. They didn't do the mRNA vaccines. They had homegrown vaccines, particularly Sinovac. But from what I've seen in Asia, the Sinovac also caused high mortality. I know of recent cancer cases amongst people who only took Sinovac. So I think the patterns of harm are probably similar. And to be honest, we don't know what was in the vaccines. No one knows.
Yeah, I think that's clear. I mean, given that when we have studied the vials, we find there's a whole bunch of stuff that's not supposed to be there. So
yeah. So this has implications, global implications. China claims their population is 1.4 billion. It might not be. It might be considerably less. And this might not be a central government issue. This may be more that the regional governments claimed more births and fewer deaths so they could get funding from the central government. And when this is done over decades, it becomes a self-perpetuating lie that would be hard to step back from. Some observers say that China's real population could be anywhere between 500 million and 1 billion. We don't know. We honestly don't know. But it is something to watch because it does have global repercussions.
Yeah, and I've encountered other experts similarly questioning China's population reality versus the claims. So you're certainly not alone as an expert with that thought.
Yeah, I lived in China in 1995. I studied Mandarin in Wuhan,
In
which was a
Wuhan, of
great
all
experience.
places.
In Wuhan, of all places. And at that time, I was young and fresh, and I saw mobs of people. I had no doubt that China was amongst the most populous countries in the world at that time. But over the years, I've traveled to China many times, and last year I also went to China, and I was shocked. Where are the people? I didn't see many people. And we were traveling through airports, train terminals, hotels, and I didn't see crowds anywhere, which makes me question, some of my friends say, oh, they're just staying home, they're ordering online, maybe, or are they really not there? We don't know.
Yeah, maybe that death rate of the last few years isn't really reflecting the reality.
Yeah, I suspect that they've grossly underreported deaths. I mean, what country wants to admit that they've killed their population? That's a recipe for social unrest. But if you don't recognize what's happened, how are you going to plan and manage population collapse? Because population collapse should be managed. It shouldn't just happen, or you'll have anarchy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting you mention that because, you talked earlier about excess mortality and that deaths are a fairly consistent seasonal thing. And an increase in mortality of 1 or 2%, that's within the sort of normal variation. But if you start getting 4, 5, 6%, then there should be red alarms going off. And yet in the last few years since 2021, as you'll show us some numbers later, there's some very large increases in excess mortality that governments are just not talking about. At least old world governments aren't. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like it never happened. They just don't talk about it or blame COVID. Okay, so this is China's natural population change. So they're now in negative territory for their population growth.
Oh, we see that same pattern again when you get to the recent years. 2021 on, more dying. Pretty soon after, less being born. That seems to be very consistent to me.
Yeah, and in China, you look from 2021 or 2022, the deaths have exceeded the births, and that's why you have negative population growth and the rate of change is increasing.